When we're writing code inside of a controller, we usually don't just make up our data like we're doing with the person object in the last clip. We need to fetch data from our web server, and our web server might need to talk to a SQL database to send us back the data we need, or it might talk to a NoSQL database or XML files on the server's disk. We really don't care. We just need data from that server, so we need a way to communicate with the server, and this is the job of the $HTTP service in Angular. HTTP is a service that Angular provides, and this service is just an object with methods I can use to make HTTP calls. In fact, the methods are named after the HTTP methods that I commonly use. So the methods on this object are methods like get, post, put, and delete. And HTTP get is commonly used to read information from the server, as in, get me all the details for this user, while post, put, and delete, they typically modify data somewhere and save or delete information from a database. So how does one access this HTTP service in a controller? And the answer is, just like with scope, I can ask Angular to provide me with the $HTTP service just by having a parameter on my controller function named $HTTP. It has to have the $sign in front and be all lowercase because JavaScript is a case-sensitive language. And once I have the HTTP object, I can use methods like .get, .post, and .delete to communicate with the web server. So the code you see here is sending an HTTP GET message to the URL /users/1783. Presumably the 1783 is the ID of the user that I need information about, and now the server has enough information to go off and find that data and return it to me. Every API will be a little bit different, so the URL that you use in a call to http.get will probably be a bit different for your software compared to my software. Now the code on the screen though has a serious flaw. It is calling http.get and assigning the result to scope.user. However, the HTTP communication methods on this object never ever return the data you need immediately. That's because all communication is asynchronous. When I call http.get, that will start a request to the web server in the background, and that call might take 250 milliseconds or it might take 25 seconds, but I'm not going to be able to get the result immediately like this code here implies. What the HTTP methods do is return an object immediately known as a promise. A promise object is an object that promises to give you some result in the future, and that result might be the data that you need, or the result might be an error if the server was unavailable. The way I find out is to call a then method on my promise and pass the then method a function that will be called in the future. So again, we see the pattern that we talked about in the introduction where we pass functions to other functions to do work. The then method will call my function when the data is ready, sometime in the future, and it will pass the data into my function as a parameter. Here I'm taking a parameter named a response because the promise for an HTTP call will pass to me an object that represents the HTTP response, including things like the HTTP status code. But in many cases, all you need to look at is the data property of this response, because that will contain the data that the web server has returned to you. And now I can take that data and add it to my scope as a user property. That makes the data from my server available to use from the view. Many people, when they write code like this, will shorten it up just a bit into a single series of chained functions. So http.get, pass in the URL, .then, here's how I want to process the response. Now before we write this code ourselves, let's take a look at a server API that we can easily use from our controllers.